We had a very tragic night in Manchester. Tell us about that. What happened?
It's the first terrorist attack that's happened in the UK since 2005. And so this is the country's reeling, and understandably so, because this was an attack that happened on young children, and primarily young girls, at a pop concert. And you could say that, especially with ISIS having claimed responsibility for this attack, it's just another step in showing how depraved they are, because they're now targeting young girls who are trying to enjoy their freedom.
Meanwhile, while this is happening in Manchester, the President of the United States is on the road. He's been traveling around the world, Saudi Arabia to Israel. What's important about the President's trip so far?
Especially in the context of Manchester, the Saudi Arabia, Middle East, including Israel, these areas are not they're not new to terrorism, and they're certainly not new to the ideas of extremism, whether it's religious or culturally or tribally motivated. So the president had announced in Saudi Arabia a new consortium for countering extremism, a new center. I'm not sure if there's going to be money behind it, or if that means there's going to be additional cooperation from the Arab states. Are they going to be providing troops to fight ISIS in Syria? What are they exactly going to be doing? There was an announcement, not necessarily a lot of meat on the bones of that announcement. And in Israel, he affirmed a bilateral relationship. I think he's also learning how fraught the situation really is in terms of understanding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and trying to get to a peace agreement. So he's made some strong statements about wanting peace, but is starting to realize that there's a reason why people have failed so far.
We saw the President's family playing a very large role in this trip. What does that look like from abroad for a lot of these leaders?
Particularly with you have Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner taking high-level meetings, and yes, they do have West Wing roles, but they are perceived as the son and daughter of the president. That sends a signal to places like Saudi Arabia, where you have a king and royal family, and governments pass through the hands of children by lineage. That's signaling that the U.S. is turning less and less of a democracy, and is starting to mimic the behaviors of these autocrats, particularly when going to having a summit of all of these leaders who are not promoting democracy and freedoms in their own countries, and not call it moralizing, but that's generally been the strength of the United States, is leading by example. So our example isn't as shiny as it once was.
And meanwhile, back here at home, we're seeing the President submitted a budget out of the White House that cuts a lot of non-defense spending. What does that mean for American football?
Sure. The USAID and the State Department funding is less than 1% of the federal budget. So we're already talking a really small piece of the pie. You've had several generals, including the General Mattis, who's head of the Pentagon right now, say that they need the diplomatic budget, they need the aid budget to be strong and robust, because that is what creates peace situations and prevents conflicts from spreading. So cutting conflict stabilization money, cutting foreign aid, it's not denying people charity, it's denying the United States a strategic opportunity to prevent having to put U.S. soldiers and boots on the ground.
We also saw former CIA Director John Brennan testify on the Hill today. Is there anything important about the testimony we should know?
Particularly in light of the election, and the fact that after the election, the White House did impose sanctions on Russia specifically for interfering in our election. So there was strong action taken based on evidence collected by the CIA. So there was enough evidence to take some really strong action against the Russian entities and against Russian individuals. That evidence has not been shared publicly. It was not shared with members of Congress today in the hearing, but the director made some very strong statements about how the evidence was there for not only collusion between members of the campaign and Russians, but that he had alerted people and warned the Russians to back off from trying to interfere in the United States election. Of course, the challenge is we didn't, as voters, know this in advance. We certainly did know about other domestic investigations that were going on.
And do you think the president has gotten better along the course of this trip, or have we seen him just exhibit the same Donald Trump that we've seen for the last 2 years?
He read from a script, so that's been new, and it was a relatively thoughtful script speech that he gave in Saudi Arabia. And I stumbled on saying the word Middle East because shortly after being in Saudi Arabia and then having a bilateral public meeting conversation with the Prime Minister of Israel, the President said, "Oh, I just came back from the Middle Middle East. So I guess he is learning on the go about geography and politics as well as what words to use. And so for the record, Israel is part of the Middle East.